Zo, welkom allemaal. Nou, we gaan zo meteen lekker aan de slag met de laatste sessie van vandaag alweer. Maar eerst wil ik je een korte introductie geven over SURF. Nou, vorig jaar hebben we een hartstikke mooi onderzoek gedaan naar de toekomst van fysieke en virtuele campuses in het MBO, HBO en in het WO. En dat heeft dus geresulteerd in een trendrapport en een scenario-rapport, die eigenlijk een visie geven op hoe die campuses er in 2040 uit kunnen zien. Nou, dat project loopt strakjes af aan het eind van dit jaar. We zijn dit jaar bezig met disseminatie. Hè. Nou ja, deze webinar week is daar één ding van. Maar wat we nu aan het doen zijn, is ook aan het kijken van, joh, hoe kunnen we campusontwikkeling en campusinnovatie als SURF verder ondersteunen? Nou, om dat verder scherp te krijgen, hebben we allereerst een focusgroep georganiseerd. Die vindt plaats in november. Als je daarin mee wil meedenken, nou ja, dan zal ik zo meteen even de link voor je delen. En daarnaast hebben we, even kijken, waar staat die? Nou, dat is die focusgroep. En daarnaast iets superleuks, hebben we de roadshow. De roadshow houdt eigenlijk heel concreet in dat we bij 3 fantastische onderwijslocaties gaan kijken. Volgende week woensdag al gaan we naar de Universiteit Maastricht, waar we de nieuwe bibliotheek wat daar is gebouwd, die dit jaar voor het eerst in gebruik is genomen. Die bibliotheek, die gaan we bekijken. Hoe is die tot stand gekomen? Welke trends komen daar weer in terug? Hoe hangt dat nou weer samen met die 13 trends van het Future Campus onderzoek? En ik kan je vertellen, daar is heel veel nagedacht over well-being, dus ook studentenwelzijn. Super interessant. En ook de koppeling tussen bedrijfsleven en studenten hebben ze veel mee gedaan met die ontwikkeling. Daarnaast gaan we op 1 oktober naar In Holland Amsterdam. Dat is echt een fantastische locatie. Nieuw gebouw, september in gebruik genomen. Echt helemaal wauw. Daar zie je dat er enorm is nagedacht over de manier waarop de campus ontwikkeld is. Waar ook rekening mee is gehouden voor last-minute interventies. Om juist de laatste ontwikkelingen mee te nemen in die mooie locatie. Het is overigens bijna een energie-neutraal gebouw. En als laatste op 25 oktober gaan we naar de RDM Campus in Rotterdam. Klinkt misschien een beetje gek. RDM Campus staat voor Rotterdamse Droogdokmaatschappij. En dat is eigenlijk een hele grote loods aan de haven, waar zowel MBO als HBO samenwerkt, Hogeschool Rotterdam met name. En ook weer samenwerkt en samen leert met het bedrijfsleven. Hele toffe locatie. Nou, schrijf je daar alsjeblieft snel voor in. Ik zal de link zo meteen even delen. Maar allereerst ga ik jullie het woord geven aan John Hawker. Die gaat ons meenemen in de wereld van VR en XR innovation. Hij geeft de sessie in het Engels, was ook aangekondigd. Dus John, the stage is all yours.
Hello. I will switch to my window, excuse me. Looks good?
Yes, it looks good.
Great. Thank you all for taking the time to come and see us here at the Future Campus webinar. My computer is being confusing. Okay. Hello. Today I'm talking about different things. We're talking about ethics, public values, and XR in education, their connections, as well as, well, what we're seeing amongst the trend report in connection. I was asked to sort of make this trend report trend specifically a bit more tangible, if you will, a bit more practical. And that was specifically trend 8, growing importance of ethical awareness and the safeguarding of public values and the use of technology in education. Now, obviously, this is a huge trend. This is something that, well, hits a lot of different sectors. We're talking about education specifically, but there's a lot going on. So I wanted to start this more first about XR itself. What is that? How is it being used in education with maybe a couple of examples, and then move into more of the ethics discussions and where we see action happening and why this trend is important. So to start, well, I'm John Walker. Happy to meet you. I'm an emerging technology advisor at SURF. I work predominantly on responsible technologies, verantwoordelijkheid. I work on public values with the public values team. You might know them, as well as ethics and education and research. So we're in a little bit of every domain, trying to figure out how to help our members do this stuff better. Now, first of all, of course, some of you might be asking, what is XR? What is extended reality specifically? So I made a little model for you here. Now, this spectrum, the spaces between AR, MR, and VR are getting grayer and grayer. If you're at all part of the scene, you'll see that what we mean by augmented reality, what we mean by mixed reality, tends to get a little bit vaguer and vaguer the more we see applications amongst it. For now, though, we're using AR as something like Google Glass or some of the new even mixed, well, sort of AR glasses that you see coming out of the market, especially out of China. You might even consider Ray Neo glasses as an example, if any of you have those. It's a new consumer product that makes the screens bigger on your face, but are just simply glasses, a small form, right? Mixed reality is going to be, well, in this case, the Quest Pro, so it looks more like a headset that you see the world through the cameras. You look through the cameras to see the world, to see the information out there. And then, of course, virtual reality is the one many people are familiar with, which is a head-mounted device focused on total immersion, or even some people say context change. And so these are the technologies we're talking about today. So XR is an umbrella term for all of these things. But what does this look like specifically in education? Well, that's a very interesting topic and one that we are working on a lot here at SURF. And I think we have some good examples. I think some context is important here, some context around what's going on in the Netherlands, because VRs and XR technologies are still making quite a splash even after all these years. We are seeing continuous development and piloting in many institutions. We have some examples on our website. Under the XR page, if you need to see some. We've done sort of a road show as well on XR technologies across many institutions of what was being done, their labs, the various people that are attached to these technologies. And so what we see is that XR inspires new ways of visualizing education and research, of course, and are very practically focused, right? So many people that are working in the development of XR are trying to figure out what are specific cases where the technology is very good at visualizing new data or being used in ways that sort of changes the way we think about education. And we'll see some of those examples today. Now, again, they're less practical to implement, of course. So as you can imagine, having these headsets in the room does not make it simple to use. They still require a lot of the training, digital divide problems we see where, I mean, simple things like trying to troubleshoot a device require a lot of work for specifically education. Now, there's also a leaving of the lasting impression, right? This impression on users, and usually that's students. They're usually the end users. They come back. They come back wanting more. They come back seeing XR as a very interesting technology. Now it's a bit dependent on what kind of software they use or what application they use in the headset. But in general, we see some very positive outcomes of this stuff. And on a national level, we see different things happening. We see the NPulse, the Groeifunds, the XR Pilot Hub, specifically working on XR technologies in education. If you're interested in that, I'm also part of that Pilot Hub. And if you want to know more, please let me know. We also see the KIC initiative, or the CIIIC. This is amongst of the creators or the creatives of the industry wanting to get together and have a coalition of people working on immersive technologies. And Dutch, of course, which is more focused on training and healthcare. And they also use XR technologies and try to experiment with that. And so all over the Netherlands, you see XR technologies continue to sort of, hold on and try new things and keep piloting and see where this goes. So let's look at, well, some of those examples. One of those examples is, well, die studentenrechten kunnen pleiten, oefenen in een levensrechte virtual rechtszaal. Now, this is a really interesting example. It does actually date back to even 2018, where they allowed law students to practice this pleading in a lifelike virtual courtroom. And as you can imagine, this is practical, but also very social. It's a very social way of using VR, trying to talk to students, other students, but also have this 360 environment to make them feel like they're part of the courtroom. This, of course, has practical uses, such as not having to go to a courtroom every day or booking a courtroom. So you can always have the courtroom virtually. And they had a follow-up project in 2022 to sort of try to allow judges to participate and enter, enabling remote feedback, being there with the students even. Now, we've seen this at different universities, I believe Erasmus, but again, I'm not totally sure about this one. It's a very interesting project. And if you have more information about it, feel free to send it in the chat. things like this continue to surprise me. We also see new ideas, even in the governments in South America, trying to use these technologies in official courtrooms. And I think there's also, of course, USA examples. So this is a very interesting sort of, yeah, honestly, weird trend of how far can this go? And it also makes you wonder, if we're going to talk about ethics, what kind of things get recorded and by what companies that use these headsets. Needless to say, it's a very interesting example. One that I'm going to talk about is coming from a report that we did, and that many, actually even the Verstellingsplan, if you know it, has also written on. And this is more about VR-based digital laboratories. So laboratories that we're wanting to be made virtual, and that we see sort of the teacher creating the space in VR, right? And then the students can go into VR and sort of have their kick in, right? Or their oh my God, I can't think of the word, their introduction to the lab. So for instance, here's the example. And this is very interesting, of course, because this allows students not to actually have to go to a lab, but actually use lab equipment, see the lab layout, and interact with the lab in just very simple ways, of course. But what we saw in our research was that it did help students feel more confident in the lab. It was a very practical, again, example of how this stuff can be used in education. And it also raises some questions around public values that we placed in a report that I'll mention later. Now, of course, how does this attribute to the efficiency of training or practical skills was one of the larger questions that made this project possible. And it's something that actually many universities looked at, including University Twente, Groningen, and I think the Wageningen University as well. So this is a very interesting example. Another one that we might talk about is there's actually two coming out of the Hogeschool Utrecht. One is more about feedback on language of body language of students, and there you see more of a maybe augmented reality example where a student is recorded with a phone. But they've also sort of done this in a VR way, a VR presentation, where they have the students actually present their thesis to a virtual audience, and this sort of has been trying to train skills in communication and presentation skills. This also allowed students to sort of use the VR headset when they needed to practice their thesis, instead of finding 6 people to practice the thesis in front of, which can be sometimes rather difficult. Now, this is a very, again, in my opinion, practical example of how this can be used, but you can also imagine the feedback and data that is scanned by the body, or scanned by the technology of the body, in how students sort of communicate. In fact, how I'm presenting right now might be looked at in specific ways, and data points of the body and the tone of language and the speed at which you speak. All of these have been sort of experimented on, researched at the Hogeschool Utrecht. It's very interesting research, and it sort of lends also into the study data, the sort of learning analytics discussions we have here. Now, this is all fine and good, but what about the trend? So what? Growing importance of ethical awareness and safeguarding public values, right? What does this have to do with anything? Well, it has to do with a lot. Now, some of the things I've mentioned are very interesting regarding what data is scanned especially on students that might have to consent or don't know what they're consenting to. But there's also been movements amongst organizations that we follow, such as the Rathenau Institute and even European-funded projects like XR for Human. I highly suggest the Rathenau Quick Scan. They've done it in both Dutch and English. They talk about the impacts on society, that the policy people, the beleidsadviseuren, whatever they are, right, need to have thought leadership going forward. Now is the moment to start talking about this stuff. And they have a lot of good, nice analysis on the risks and lenses through public values. The XR for Human stuff is more about providing guidance and tools, of course, that they want to create and make, but also this focus on equitable, inclusive, and human-centered developments on XR technologies. It's very interesting stuff, and some stuff that we've also been watching here at SURF. Now, for our own work and some of the stuff that I'll talk about regarding the responsible tech world and responsible XR, we've published 2 reports now. I'll talk a little bit about the one that's behind there, the Responsible XR for Public Values, and that's more of a kind of focus. Now, we published this report thinking, what kind of questions come to mind or that people ask when public values are raised regarding XR technologies? We used the example that was earlier showed from the Hogeschool Utrecht on virtual presentations. This screenshot is again an example where the presenter is looking at someone in the audience, and there's a given time limit of how long they should look at the person in the audience. This is considered, again, a style of presenting. Now, different questions, of course, came up, such as, the cases that came up. So we have two cases. One is the digital laboratories that I mentioned, and this case. We talk about the public values that were chosen and why, and of course, we talk about what questions arose. Now, the questions, of course, could be many. We tried to focus on specific public values from our Waardewijzer, our value compass. We talked about things like what data is necessary for proper feedback and how is this communicated to the learner. We talked about how does the headset or wearable impact the communication between instructor and the student? Is the instructor inside the virtual world or not, and does that matter? Can we find agreements maybe between sharing simulations and virtual worlds between institutions, or are they open source to be changed in the future? And this is not always the case. Now, these questions, of course, are many, and there's many in the report. Our goal here was to sort of inspire a conversation, but also have some handle holds for teachers and educators and researchers to try to ask better questions around these public values that we continue to hear are of such high priority. And I guess you could say these multiple key takeaways that I've been discussing can be outlined in a couple ways. So far, what we've discussed, and I know it's been a lot, has been things like XR trainings have shown to be effective in specific uses and applications, these practical examples, for instance, leading to sort of new transformations or changes in both lab training and communications. We've seen that the public values guide sort of critical reflection on XR technologies. These are not easy questions that come from public values, but we want to continue to ask them, and we have sort of more building on this in the future as these XR technologies continue to change. And of course, what we think is moving forward requires both public values and responsible practices, this sort of responsible side of things, right? And this is more around the ethics of technology. Then, of course, that leads to a much larger question, right? Which is, can we do more and how? Can we do more and how? Well, as many of you on this call know, ethics is tricky. Now, it's extra. No one can make you a responsible person. There's many answers to ethics. Ethics has a lot of different opinions. There's a lot of different ways to argue a certain point or pattern. The technologies themselves change a lot. XR and AI to be given some examples, and this is also hard for us, right? Because that means probably your ethics need to change along the way. You need to be prepared for new, say, affordances by the technology. Well, for us here at SURF, we're trying to work on these things. I'll give a brief overview of responsible tech at SURF. That can be things like promoting responsible innovation. That can be things like activating public values in action. That can be things like stimulating collaboration or, say, responsibility as a practice. Now, in this presentation, I won't sort of go into the variety of theory that we have regarding why we do this necessarily. I will post in the chat a Dutch article that we've written on how we do this and what it means going forward. Of course, we're trying to do events. We are trying to create articles. We have a podcast series, workshops, and of course, we are connected to NPulse and some advising work that we do. But if you're interested in this work, please let me know. In summation, responsible tech in a nutshell is responsibility as a practice. So keeping it as a competency, a muscle that you sort of build, right? Public values in action. These values are very important, but we need to have actions tied to them and processes perhaps. And a lot of the discussion is around navigating prioritization. How do we prioritize certain things over others, and why do we choose that? And for some, it's a lot of transparency discussions, right? Now, our members continue to challenge us and show us new ways of asking these questions as well. That's why we've highlighted some of these interesting examples here. Tying it back to a little bit with Future Campus, you might ask the question, well, how can we strive for more responsible futures, right? How do we responsibly go forward with these technologies. I really appreciate that the Future Campus has these interesting Zukunft scenarios, right? The growth, the discipline, transformation, and the decline, if you will, scenario. These are ways in which, in my opinion, you frame technologies as well in your relationships to them. Sure, there's a lot of trend discussions and marketing, but I also think there's a lot of discussions around what it means to go forward. What are we striving for? And a lot of that comes from the ethics we do and that we decide are good for the good life, right? Well, anyway, how do we start then? How do we start this responsible tech discussion? Well, I think it's really interesting, and I've already mentioned this before, but of course, the article that we wrote, we've translated also into Dutch, and we tried to give some language to this as even a method. And I'll give an example here. I have two. One is this sort of model that we created to do responsible tech within the institutions. And of course, that means starting with perhaps assessment is one way to look at it, right? Acknowledging where you are right now and the impacts that they have. We offer tools in the report to do these things, to do these different steps along the method of the model. Formulate your ambitions. What are we going for, right? Why are we doing this? What kind of responsible people do we want to become, perhaps, if that's where you want to start this conversation? And of course, the second one's more about creating the right sort of environment. Perhaps it's iterative approaches and making choices to reflect, but also making room. One way we've tried to think about this is through games. For instance, ethical games like AI ethics games, games on privacy. These allow for the space and the right sort of discussion pieces maybe to start this conversation. It also maybe allows room for students to try their best at having these hard conversations with teachers that they haven't had before. And of course, having the right people around as well. Ethics is not done in a vacuum, right? Now, overall, this has been my presentation on XR ethics and the public values that are shaping this. I'm also curious to hear what you guys have to say, as this stuff is very much my day-to-day, but I find this stuff fascinating, and I was so glad that the Future Campus invited me to give this small talk. Again, this trend on increasing awareness on public values and the excessive pressure, the pressure to do better with XR tech, continues across the country. This is also something we wrote in our own tech trend report for the XR trend report that came out in this last summer. We also wrote a section on, well, basically, yeah, increased pressure on public values, right? Meaning that we see only more discussions around how can these companies provide the right solutions in regards to public values and the responsibility they have as well for our privacy as citizens of the EU, as citizens of the Netherlands, and of course the end users, which sometimes are children. Are there any questions from the audience? Thank you.
There was a question, John, and that
Okay, I can't
question
see it.
was, no, it was earlier in the chat, and that was, do you know which faculty is using the virtual courtroom, just the one that you showed in the beginning of your presentation?
I assume it's a law faculty, to be honest. The example is called Pleitvrij. So if you Google that, you'll find different examples. I think here it's the VU, the Vrije Universiteit. But I believe there's also been a pilot of this in Erasmus. And I believe Nick van Breda is also in the chat, and if he knows, because I wonder if he had any experience with this example as well. This is a super interesting example, and I think we will see more things like this in the future, including, I mean, you can imagine this could extend to debate clubs. You could have an international debate club among students. You can imagine this in examples with politics, of course, like getting used to being in a political space, maybe foreign political spaces if you want to train ambassadors. So this is a very interesting and not terribly complicated example. Thanks for your question.
Okay. And I got another question, since I'm waiting for other questions that will become in the chat maybe. What public values should we consider when adopting XR technologies on campus?
Yeah, this is something we've really been focusing on with the Pilot Hub XR in the NPulse. So focusing really on responsible XR for education. One of the prime, I would say, starting values, in my opinion, that has really helped people start the process at a low barrier, has been transparency. So how do we be transparent to each other that we choose to use these devices and buy them with, say, public money or among students that maybe don't know who they're what they're wearing on their faces. So being transparent with your choices, being transparent on how you got there, being transparent on what your goal is with these things. Because we've also, of course, seen a lot of like the iPad schools in a way, right? They get bought and then they get put down and then they get dusty and they never get used again. So being transparent about also what is your end goal with this? How are we going to recycle them? How are we going to decide? And maybe that's not only right. That's not only the responsibility of the educators. That's also the responsibility of, say, the INCOBE, the procurement, the governance around the institution. But what we see is that transparency, at least, is a value that continues to build the conversation in a way that does lead to other public values and discussion. Obviously the biggest one that comes up all the time is privacy. But luckily with privacy, we have a lot of work going into that with the AI Act. We have a lot of work going into that with GDPR. So there are sort of good tools for that. And for us too, it's been a considered thing of should we focus on one value or multiple values when helping people. That's been an interesting part of this job for sure. Thanks for your questions.
Thank you, John. Nick van Breda also asked another question, but I will put his Nick. I will put your microphone on if that's okay, so you can ask him the question. I will unmute you right now. Yeah.
Hi, Nick.
Let's see if it works.
Hi, John.
Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So I was wondering, like the ethical parts of the learning to speech application is there actually an ethical risk when you are testing how many seconds people are looking in the direction of the audience? Is there any ethical risks there, or how do you look at that part?
Well, we could take it in two ways, right? So on the one hand, the context of this particular case is very interesting because it was made I think in collaboration with or in cooperation with an ethical team or like a data ethics team. So I think they've done a very good job at sort of isolating the data, making sure it gets deleted maybe after a certain amount of time, so and so, right? On the other hand,
is that a risk to check how many seconds you are watching an NPC?
Let's think about it this way, Nick. I think in this limited context, it might be hard to stretch our imagination and make a bold claim that it is. But I do think that in the future, I think you and I are both aware that as companies start taking on these things, and there are companies that do communications trainings with VR, it might be hard for the companies to look away from or not look at the data that people do look around the room at maybe certain logos, at certain items, at certain parts of the body, and not use that maybe as commercial data to sell to other companies.
Yeah, so more the opportunity that you have head tracking movements measured, that you can use it for commercial purposes as well. That's the ethical part of this technology then.
It is a discussion more on what is the scope of the use of, say, body data, right? Because we still don't know how biometrics will be used in the future. We don't really know. There is an endless supply of this stuff. How I walk, how I move, and it's not clear. I mean, in your work, Nick, I mean, you also work in VR. Have you had any weird cases, or has it been all, I guess, fine with piloting people and trying new things, or anything that surprised you along the way?
Not yet, but I think the question that arises the most is from teachers that are willing to know if the educational content that's made in VR has links to research papers, links to prove that the methods being used in VR are actually working or are backboned with research, so they can research it as a teacher if they would like to use this application. So they're more insecure about, okay, this is a way of teaching, but is it my way of teaching?
Right. That's a great point. Pedagogy, or the pedagogische scope, is always very interesting here. We also get the question a lot of, is this app safe?
Yeah.
What does that mean, right? I mean, that's a really big term to use for a digital device. I don't know if we ask those same questions with phones and with iPads, but we certainly ask that question with VR for some reason, right?
Yeah, I think the like personalization of VR headset was a big concern when you needed to make a Facebook account to actually start, or ByteDance, or a TikTok account on a Pico. But nowadays, I think it's very easy to mislead the system that you are this person, by taking nicknames and using functional email addresses and such. So I think a lot of teachers has found a way around it, that these questions are no longer asked that often. Like, this headset is anonymized, and now students can learn in these apps. So the apps can be dangerous, but the student is anonymized. So I'm okay with them using it, because they don't track who this person actually is who is using the app.
Yeah, I can imagine that there are very clever teachers out there that try their best to go around a sort of system. I think it's sad that we're even having this discussion, that there is a system, right, that they have to navigate around, because they don't feel the trust, they don't feel safe maybe using the device. And the ironic part comes down to when we have a lot of public money into things like learning analytics, right, where we want to tie data to students.
Yes.
And then we anonymize devices that can get us that data.
Yeah, I see more and more teachers who are needing educational apps requesting this learning analytics now. So I want to follow this student on every time he uses a VR headset. And then, if you configured everything that it's anonymized, and then they needed it out of the sun. So yeah, that's a hard thing. That's also with the device data that is captured and is shown to Meta or Pico. And the other side is, what kind of details would you like to use for learning analytics to see if the student is progressing or not? I think that's still in a very early stage at the moment, that teachers actually require a VR app to have learning analytics for learning. That's, I think, the next phase, that you're not using a VR app for getting started with a course, but trying to see this is in the whole curriculum as a part of the learning experience, and needing to be tested and reviewed, and given a number for someone's progression in a VR app. That's quite new, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Well,
Yeah,
thank
and
you.
Go ahead, Estelle.
Sorry, there's another question from Tom Bogart.
Thanks,
Tom
Nick.
said, "Thank you, thanks, Nick." It said, "Well, one of your slides said, can we do more? And if so, how?" But Tom is asking, "But should we do more?" What's your opinion about that, John?
Yeah, that was tied into the deepness of the content in this discussion. It continues to go into sort of this tricky ethics discussion, right? What are we going to do if we decide public values are so important? If we decide that, responsibility or well-being or privacy is so important, what are we going to do? It's a great question. It's something that we're experimenting with here as well. I work with Duke Bio on responsible AI, but also I focus a lot on responsible XR stuff. And of course, I just mentioned that the different variety of things that we're trying to do. We're trying to build a little bit around knowledge sharing, but also raising awareness. We are still continuing to make events. If you're interested in joining a responsible tech event to talk about ethics, to talk about the ways in which people in other institutions are trying to do things like with responsible AI, please let me know. Feel free to just say hi in chat or find me on LinkedIn. Also, my email address will probably be available. And so these come with different things. These come with different parts. We are a small team, but we think that we do have something here. And part of that is what I showed earlier with this model. So trying to help people see that there is a way to do this. If you're interested in applying this model in your institution, please let me know, because we're, of course, also looking for cases where we can show people how to do this and the tools that we put into the paper itself. And that's this paper here. And that'll comes in both Dutch and English if that's easier for you. This is a continual experiment, like I said. Yeah.
I shared a link in the chat earlier.
Thank you. Yeah,
welcome.
this has been a best part of my job right here is this kind of stuff.
Okay. Oh,
Thanks for your question.
Thank you, John. If there are no other questions, let's see. Don't think so for now.
I will stop sharing.
Okay, great. Then I will share my screen for one more second. Well, let's see, where is it? Yes, okay. And well, tomorrow we will have some other webinars, of course, and I will show you the list. And here they are. Oop, wrong one. Here it is. Tomorrow, best practices. We're going to talk about Smart Campus as well. And the 11th, so Thursday, Merel de Boer, that is, she's from Hogeschool in Holland. She's going to tell something about the development of the new campus. And that campus is also the one you can visit with the roadshow. Furthermore, Gul is going to explain us something about the future campus and virtual and augmented reality. Femke Kamp is telling us something about campus development and how does that work in practical. And also on the Thursday, Maaike is telling you something about the libraries and research centers in University of Maastricht. And also University of Maastricht is somewhere you can visit during the roadshow. Well, for now, I put in all the links in the chat. I wish you a very nice evening, and please follow us on surf.nl. Thank you.
Thanks, Estella. Bye, everybody.
Bye.